Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Welcome to Ethical Perspectives. I'm Bob Rush. I will be moderating our panel today. We've watched some dozen states pass laws that some say loosen up child labor laws and child labor protections. Some proponents say it really is simply giving minors greater opportunities in the workforce. Some say it's filling job vacancies, but others say kids should be home and not working late into the night. So we're fortunate to have a panel of three outstanding Iowans who will cover the gamut of what we're here to talk about. Jessica Dunker is president and CEO of the Iowa Restaurant Association. Nate Boulton is Senator Nate Boulton from Central Iowa. He's district number 20. And Professor Cesar Rosado Marzan, if I butchered that pronunciation, forgive me, professor of law at the University of Iowa, and his responsibilities also include director of graduate programs and visiting scholars. So welcome all. Let's just start, if we could, Professor, a little history about where we are federally. How long have we had federal laws around to protect kids, and have they changed over the years?
Well, we've had them for a long time. So the main federal statute that protects children from certain kinds of oppressive labor conditions is the Fair Labor Standards Act. It was enacted in 1938. So I guess that's in 15 years, it'll be 100 years. And so it did come, after many decades of struggles by the labor movement and others trying to, limit the hours and also the kinds of jobs that children should undertake. And that's been, basically the law of the land now for many, many years. And then the states have their own laws most of the time, kind of mimicking what the federal law provides, or sometimes trying to go beyond what the federal law provides. In some states, you might have some rules that might actually be, slightly below the federal standards.
Okay. Now, Nate, could you help our viewers understand, as far as Iowa law goes, have we had minor protection laws for a long time?
We certainly have, and they've been in place for a long time and protecting minors for a long time. And in terms of the goal there, just like in the federal system, our state has been doing what it can do to safeguard our children from abusive labor practices. It comes from the standpoint of children should be able to develop, grow, and learn before entering into careers and entering into the workforce. And so our statutes here in Iowa have been designed to protect children. Some of them, absolutely, we're right for update and should have been updated. But it's something that, my perspective, it should have been a collaborative process. And coming into the legislative session, we could have probably found out a way to modernize our child labor statutes to better protect children without putting children at additional risk.
Okay. Now, Jessica, is it your organization that was primary to promote change, updating the law and expanding it?
It was a group of businesses that came together. We were certainly one of those. We give 1 in 3 Iowans their first job. That's where they find work and learn valuable skills. Half the people in the state of Iowa have worked in a restaurant. So we certainly had a vested interest in this, but we were part of a coalition that came together. It included the Iowa Grocery Industry Association, the Association of Business and Industry, the Home Builders Association, as well as some individual healthcare and other business groups that were looking at ways to provide more employment opportunities, as well as more work-based learning or school-based educational opportunities, particularly for the skilled trades. So like all legislation, we took our ideas to some legislators, and it was drafted by the Legislative Services Office. So we were pleased that the 3 priorities of the Restaurant Association were in fact included in the original legislation.
What were the things that your association was aiming to do as far as your industry?
There were 3 things that were of great importance to us, 2 of which have remained in the legislation as passed by the Senate, and then today, about a half hour ago, the House. The first was the expansion of hours for those under 16 to 9 p.m. year round. Right now, a 15-year-old has to go home at 7 p.m. from a job. However, if that same 15-year-old wants to go watch a varsity basketball game, they can't do it until 7 p.m. because that's when the Iowa High School Athletic Association mandates that games be started. That has remained in both chambers. The second piece that mattered to us was related to creation of a work drive permit that was similar to the school drive permit that would have allowed students and young people that choose to work to drive on a direct path to and from work. And just like they can do now for school activities, that actually did not stay in the bill. It's become part of a greater study looking at youth driving privileges. And then the third piece was allowing 16 and 17-year-olds with parental permission on file in restaurants only to be able to carry alcoholic beverages from a bar to a table. Today, people in restaurants all over the place have young people that bus tables and take it away, but it's not legal for them to take it to the tables. So we were looking for that. That, with a lot of guardrails put around it, has remained in the legislation.
Now, Nate, this doesn't sound too bad. Do you have any objections to what she's describing?
Well, there was a lot more to the bill than those 3 priorities.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where the concerns started to build. The original version of the bill actually had immunity provisions for children who were injured in these occupations. They literally would have been the only workers who would be in a workplace where they suffer an injury and wouldn't have recoveries to make for those injuries. Through the amendment process, through continued conversations, we've been able to change that. But at the end of the day, what we kept hearing was the reason why that was in there was it was hard to ensure against the risk of child injuries happening in these expanded workplace settings. And the absolute wrong answer to that was to say, well, then we just won't let children recover for injuries. And that includes death. If a child is injured or dies in the workplace, the bill, as it came out of the Senate, referenced death in those workplace settings. So we had very serious concerns about a lot of aspects. The driving issue has been a really tough balancing test of trying to find the balance of not letting kids get so far into open access on the roads to put them in more and more dangerous nighttime driving and long distance driving situations, but also seeing that we needed to have some equity in school activities and workplace settings for kids. So all of these things scream study and figure out good proposals to compromise. What we saw instead was a bill drop and pushed through that has had to be amended and worked on the fly. And now here we are in the last week of the legislative session, still batting it back and forth between the Iowa Senate and the Iowa House. I just wish we would have had more people at the table than employers trying to solve workplace issues with children in expanded workplace settings, because that ends up creating a lot of concerns for just how many workplaces were opened up to children.
Professor, when states like Iowa start legislating in this area of child labor, are there any red flags that are set up by the federal law?
Well, it really complicates the picture a lot, right? Because of the federal standard is one standard, and then you have a state standard that's different, right? The first thing that it happens is employers might not be sure exactly which standard they need to follow, and certainly employees are not going to be sure, what are the laws that really cover them, right? And especially minors. So that's one problem. The last draft I looked at regarding this bill also has some really interesting things in there that I found pretty clever, where it regulates. So the Iowa law would regulate work activities. That's the term that it uses. The federal standard talks about occupation. So one thing that I think if this becomes law, some employers might say is that, right, we're actually working within a different framework of so-called work activities. So, I create an educational program or some kind of internship or some kind of training program for my workers. That's really what they are. They're kind of students, and they're engaging in these work activities, and then therefore, right, they would fall out from the Fair Labor Standards Act. And to me, that's a serious problem, because then we're really kind of in a legal space that I don't know exactly what law really will be kind of covering those employees. So, generally speaking, I will say the federal law, as long as it covers the employer, and most private sector employers, it will cover them, preempt. So the state cannot go below the federal standard. The state can go above the federal standard. But again, there's this sort of interesting language about work activities vis-a-vis occupations, and a few other things there that might raise legal issues about whether, this law applies, meaning the state law, the new state law, or the federal law.
Is it the U.S. Department of Labor that is charged with enforcement of the federal law?
For the most part, when it comes, when the Fair Labor Standards Act, it'll be the Department of Labor. In fact, they're right now trying to ramp up enforcement, because they've been finding out that employers are actually engaging in all kinds of violations of the law. There's a new task force that the White House is creating between Department of Labor and Department of Human another department within the federal government, DHS. So this is a problem right now, and so by states kind of weakening child labor laws, that creates a problem to enforce child labor laws, generally speaking.
Some say that the federal government is scarce resources for enforcement to begin with.
Yes,
there
are basically there are very, very few resources to enforce the law as it stands today, for sure.
Okay. Now, one criticism that I've heard, Jessica, was that what's the minimum wage in Iowa?
It's still the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour.
And it's been that way in Iowa for decades? Decades.
However, I defy anyone to find someone working for minimum wage. I mean, the truth is that the labor pool is, particularly for entry-level positions like ours, you can't find a teenager that works for less than $12 to $15 an hour already. Even tip wage, which is legally in Iowa, can be $4.35 an hour. You're not seeing employers that are paying that low of a tip wage, because you have to pay more for employees. And certainly we value employees. We have never been proponents of things like a youth wage, where you say the same work is worth less money because it's done by a younger person. We think that teens should be paid the fair market value of entry-level jobs. But we also, as again, the industry that provides first job opportunities for a third of the state, and work opportunities, period, for at least half the people that live in the state, that there has to, in the employment ecosystem, be a place for entry-level positions that are paying entry-level wages. And entry-level wages in Iowa right now are $12 an hour, even for teens.
That's during a period of low unemployment. What happens after the soft landing or the hard landing and unemployment rates go way up?
Yeah, in the state of Iowa, we are adding 1,000 jobs a year in the restaurant industry. We're still trying to find 10,000 workers to come back to our industry. And so one thing we know about our industry, and I don't know about others, but what I can say about our own industry is that people use our establishments. They come out whether the economy is good or bad. That would certainly have been true if you go back and look at 2009. We had just as much foot traffic coming through our establishments. We had just as many employees, and wages don't go down. Once they're up, they stay up. And so we would expect that those great entry-level wages will stay available to teens moving forward.
Some of the proponents have said, not just in Iowa, that it's really the primary purpose is not giving kids an opportunity. It's really primarily to address the shortage of workers. Is that consistent with your association?
Actually, no. We really feel like we have limited what teenagers can do in the workplace. And I want to be really clear that the restaurant and every other industry doesn't want children working, but we don't think 15-year-olds are children. We think 15-year-olds are teenagers. They're freshmen and sophomores in high school. And one of the things that came out of COVID is kids need to find purpose. And for kids that don't find purpose in school activities or don't have the privilege of being on the football team or being in the show choir, work is something that they choose because it provides them purpose. And so we really have found that 15-year-olds post-COVID are the group of kids that really want to work. And those teens can make some really great money. And again, we like guardrails put on, but they are doing a lot of other things past 7 p.m. at night. And we felt like 9 p.m. was a reasonable request on that hours for teens.
But if I just can interject, under the federal standards, right, 14 and 15-year-olds can work in all kinds of jobs, but except in those that are particularly hazardous as established by the Department of Labor. So what the Iowa law is that it makes, the kinds of jobs 14 and 15-year-olds can take, broader. So certainly, right, in that sense, it gives them more opportunities. But I at least haven't seen 14 and 15-year-olds requesting for more. What I've heard more is, businesses trying to fill jobs that they can't otherwise fill. So I do think that this is more about trying to meet, labor demand, right, that we can apparently fill right now in the state than providing jobs that kids are out there trying to get.
Nate, does the Iowa Department of Labor vigorously enforce the current laws as far as minors and work?
Vigorous enforcement is a tough word. I would say with limited personnel and resources, that they do the best they can. But in terms of the things that we can do to protect kids in the workplace, again, going back to what Jessica was saying, that nobody works for minimum wage. We simply know that that's not true. We have thousands of Iowans working on minimum wage. We know that. We have statistics that show us that. There are people earning minimum wage. And it sounds like the Restaurant Association is conceding that minimum wage is out of date and needs to be updated. And I hope we can work on making that happen. But the other point here is, yes, we're hearing that labor is in high demand. Adding in child labor as the safety release valve is not the right answer. Expanding workplaces to more and more children and exposing them to more and more dangers is not the answer. And the truth is, it's not just the Restaurant Association. And I know Jessica's talking about good actors. We as a legislature have to worry about the bad actors, the ones that will go too far with too much opportunity for abusive practices. And when you open that up to, the bill that came out of the Iowa Senate allowed people to engage in roofing, in very dangerous occupations, if workforce development approves the application, not the labor commissioner, workforce development. And the incentive is to expand workplaces to more child workers. That's not a good way to drive Iowa's economy. If we had growing wages, growing benefits, and a growing quality of life, we wouldn't have to resort to expanding child labor. We would be figuring out ways to find those workforces from other states coming in here because they want to be here and choose to be Iowans. So I think we've got a long ways to go to get to the real solution on the workforce crisis in this state. And child labor is not the right answer. I appreciate that we've made progress on this bill, but we still have a long ways to go before the finish line here.
and we're at the last week of the legislative session, bouncing a bill back and forth. The time to sit down and figure these problems out was ahead of the session. Let's try and do that next session.
Jessica, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it?
I think it sounds elitist to say that we are trying to solve our workforce issues with children when it's not recognizing the fact. You all may not know teens that are looking for work or asking to have expanded hours. In my industry, I've met all kinds of them who would very much like to be able to work till 8 o'clock, or instead of being forced to do a 3-hour shift 4 times a week to get their 12-hour limit, that they get 2 shifts that are 6 hours. And so that they actually have more evenings and more time to do other things at home. Right now, the bill as written has so many guardrails in it that it's a great start. And actually, I want to compliment Senator Boulton, because very early on, he raised some concerns and was able to help influence, I think, some of the stronger language that came out of the Senate. I also would very much like to compliment Representative Conforst, who led her caucus today through the amendment process to strengthen the bill, and talked about how bipartisan the amendment process was. Will there be future changes? Probably. Will we ask for future changes? You bet, because that driving issue right now is really unfair. That kids that play on a sports team or want to go lift weights every day in the summer or want to go to the school dance at 15 can drive, and kids who choose to work can't drive to and from work. So everybody moving forward is going to continue to look for changes. And this is a great starting place. And it's a great starting place that's had influences from multiple industries and multiple legislators on both sides of the aisle. I actually appreciate all of them.
Thank you. Professor, one of the biggest fines levied this past few months involved a company that does cleaning for meatpacking plants around the country, and they were found and fined for employing more than 100 kids illegally. Is that just the tip of an iceberg, or is that just some bad actor getting caught?
Well, as I said earlier, right, the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor has found that child labor violations have been increasing in the past year, and from 2015 to today, or to 2021, or more or less, over 200%. So, tip of the iceberg, yes. I mean, it actually shows a problem. There are news reports coming out from various news outlets showing that some kids that have come unaccompanied, without parents from the southern border are being hired, right, by all kinds of industries that, where the jobs are actually quite dangerous. And so that is the problem that we're facing. And so, it's interesting to me that just when we're facing this problem and we're finding out about these things, there are all these bills, rushing through a number of legislatures out there trying to, soften child labor laws.
If I may on this, one of the pieces of language that was removed and has been sitting in Iowa law for years and years actually allowed children ages 12 to 14, if they were migrant laborers, it talked about what they could do. And the revised bill took all that language out and treats migrant children the same way we treat citizen children. That's what it should be. It talked about street things where you can sell newspapers on the street or shine shoes at 10 years old. 10-year-olds shouldn't be working. So, honestly, this bill fixes a lot of those problems as well. So I really encourage people to look at it, to read it, to understand what it is. And then if there are things that need to be changed, go through the legislative process, because that's what the group of folks that came together originally did. We looked at ways that we felt it could be improved, a whole group of people. We found legislators and explained our positions. Legislators create and ask for legislation, not not private citizens, not businesses. And that's how this came to be. And so I really think Iowans should stand together and work together to, one, provide work opportunities, two, of course, to protect children, and three, to find some equity about what we value and allow teens to do.
Nate, any comments on Jessica? Observations?
Yeah, I do. And at the beginning, I did mention that there were some very positive things that were in this proposal. Migrant children having, work assignments like that. That was a positive step. But it was concerning to see some of the really red flags that came out of this process early on regarding immunity for children who were injured in the workplace. And I do appreciate the bipartisan effort that was done once real attention was brought to that, to start working on solutions to eliminate some of those risks. And I appreciate that did come through the process, but again, that should not have been through the amendment process at the end. It should have been a collaborative effort in the beginning to find real ways to eliminate outdated sections of this code, to enhance child protections in the workplace, and yes, maybe even find some openings for opportunities for children to work safely in workplaces. But when you have a one-sided conversation where employers are coming in addressing their needs, you're going to miss things. And I hope that when we look at this down the road, we're able to be more collaborative from the start so we can get a better product when we finish.
In just a couple of minutes left, Professor, any closing thoughts you would care to make?
Not really. I think I've said, I answered your questions, and I will say, generally speaking, when it comes to child labor, I do agree that some of us might be a little bit elitist when we're talking about these matters. Some of us might, have kids and we don't tell them, I don't want you to work. And some parents can't really tell that to their kids. And I do think this is the discussion that we need to have. But this was my understanding, is that when the bill was introduced, at least in the Senate, it was like 5 a.m. or something like that, right? It's and a lot of really powerful lobbyist groups coming from Florida have been pushing this around the country. So I'm not, I don't think this has been, such an open discussion and open debate as might have, we all might have wanted it to be.
Jessica, any last thoughts?
If there was anyone from Florida involved, I didn't meet them. I sat in early on with the group of people who came together and said, how can we help teens have more opportunities to work? Again, I've shared what our 3 priorities were. Those were generated from Iowa restaurants across the state. And honestly, in its current form, we didn't get all of the things that we asked for, but we are looking forward to the expanded opportunities that we're going to be able to offer teenagers as they find those first and second jobs in our industry and they learn those skills.
Well, I wish we had more time, but unfortunately the clock is ticking. I want to thank each of you for participating, for your observations, and thank you to the viewers for watching Ethical Perspectives. Thank you, guys. I think that was one